The jury called it a manslaughter. His family called it a murder. Michael Jackson spent the final years of his life warning people that someone was trying to kill him. Nobody listened, and then his name surfaced again in the Epstein files. And suddenly the whole world started paying attention again, but they were asking the wrong questions. This is the story of Michael Jackson. Not the music, not the fame, but the system that built him. The pressure that shaped him, and the decisions that made him a target. Because by the time he died, Michael Jackson had sold more records than anyone in history. He owned one of the most valuable catalogs on earth, and he became something more bigger than a celebrity. He was a global institution. And yet, behind all of that, there was a man who was increasingly isolated, increasingly unwell, and increasingly convinced that something was gonna happen to him. To understand how we get there, we need to go all back to where it all started. Not with Michael, but with a place. Gary, Indiana, a company town in the most literal sense. Founded in 1906 by the United States Steel Corporation and named after Albert Henry Gray, a city built to feed the furnaces. By 1960, there was something around 178,000 people lived there. The air tasted like metal, but the pay was steady, and the neighborhood was segregated. Among the families who came north during the Great Migration was a man named Joseph Walter Jackson, born July 26, 1928, in Fountain Hill, Arkansas. His father, Samuel Joseph Jackson, he was a school teacher known as Professor Jackson. His mother was Crystal Lee King, and in his bloodline was a history of an American South. His grandfather, Israel Dero Jackson, had been born into slavery. Joe moved into Indiana at 18. He found work the way that any other black man found work back then, in the steel mills. Inland steel's American boundaries. Long hours, hard labor, but somewhere in that reputation, Joe realized something. He didn't want an ordinary life. He wanted something louder, something bigger. He wanted music. And then there was Catherine. May 4th, 1930 in Alabama. At just 2 years old, she contracted polio. It left her with serious, permanent limp, something she would carry for the rest of her life. But she was deeply musician. She played the piano, clarinet, even sang gospel. She carried music the way people carry prayer. So John and Catherine met each other in 1947 and they married in 1949. And in 1950 they bought a house in Gray, Indiana. That house would eventually hold 11 children. And inside the house there were 3 things that never went away: noise, pressure, and expectation. Joe Jackson, by nearly every account, he was strict, demanding, and sometimes violent. He demanded obedience, he demanded perfection, and when music entered the picture, that discipline becomes something closer into a system. It started with a guitar and Joe kept it locked away in the closet. The children weren't allowed even to touch it, but Tito couldn't stay away. He would wait until Joe left for work and open the closet and teach himself how to play by ear. The Temptation, the Four Tops, blues records, until one day he broke string and everything changed after. Joe didn't just see disobedience, he saw potential. And just like that, the Jackson 5 was born. By 1966, there were winning talent shows across Indiana. Over and over again, Joe drove them from city to city, backed into a van. Bars, strip clubs, and places where children shouldn't have been. Where the audience would throw money on you if they liked you, and bottles if they didn't. And the middle of all of that, a 6-year-old boy, Michael Jackson. At first, he wasn't even the lead singer. That was Jermaine. Michael sang backup and danced. That's it. But something was different about him. You could see it even then. He studied James Brown's every movement, every spin, every detail. He studied even J.K. Wilson, The Temptation, and he did it way better than any child had the right to do. The story says Diana Rose discovered them. That's the official version. But that's not true. It was Bobby Taylor who saw them performing in Chicago and brought them into Motown. Glenn Knight even tried to help by sending a demo tape, but it was rejected. But in 1968, they finally auditioned. At Motown headquarters, Berry Gordy wasn't even in the room, but it didn't matter because the people who were knew exactly what they were seeing. Then came the explosion. Then I Want You Back, January 31st, 1970. Michael Jackson was 11 years old. Then ABC, The Love You Save, I'll Be There. 4 numbers, 1 hit. Never done before. By 12, he was the most famous child in the whole US. By 13, he had a solo number 1 hit, Ben. He had everything. The fame, money, success, and still wasn't enough. In 1982, everything changed. It spent 37 weeks at number 1, sold over 17 million copies worldwide. The biggest album of all time. The real impact was culture. MTV initially refused to play Billie Jean. It didn't fit their format. Until CBC Records threatened to pull everything. And then MTV gave in. And overnight, everything changed. Then came Motown 25, 1983. He stepped on stage performing Billie Jean. And for the first time on live television, he did the moonwalk. 6 seconds, that's all it took. And in that moment, Michael Jackson stopped being a star and started being something else entirely. But the most important thing he have ever made, it happened in 1985. Michael Jackson bought the MTV music catalog for $47.5 million. Over 4,000 songs, including the Beatles catalog. It would later worth billions, and according to Michael, that decision made him a target.
I don't know if I should tell you this, but I don't know who may be listening. There may be a group of people that want to get rid of me.
By the 90s, things began to change. The fame was still there, the records were still selling, but behind all of it, Michael Jackson was not the same person anymore. The physical problem came first. In 1983, he was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that affected the skin. Then in 1986, he was diagnosed with vitiligo, a condition that destroyed pigmentation, causing patches of skin to lose its color. For anyone, that would be difficult, but for the most photographed man on earth, it was devastating. And as his appearance changed, so did the world treated him. And then the line between reality and narrative started to blur. At the same time, the pressure never stopped. Michael Jackson wasn't just an artist anymore. He was a global brand, a business empire, a machine that had to keep running no matter what. And to keep that machine going, he relied more and more on the doctors, on anything that would help him to sleep, help him perform, and help him keep going. But sleep was become a serious problem for him. Michael Jackson suffered from chronic insomnia, not just can't fall asleep insomnia. We're talking about nights where he wouldn't even sleep at all. And that's where things started getting dangerous. Michael Jackson was preparing for what supposed to be his comeback, a series of concerts in London called This Is It. 50 shows, massive production, global attention. But behind the scene, he was physically exhausted, mentally drained, and still unable to sleep. That's when his personal physician, Dr. Conray Murray, entered the picture. Murray was hired to oversee Michael's health during the tour operation, but very quickly he became something else. Instead of treating Michael like a patient, he began treating him like a problem to solve. Michael wanted sleep, real sleep, and Mary gave him something extreme. A propofol, something used in operation room to put people under for surgery. And night after night, inside his own home, Michael Jackson was being given those drugs to knock him unconscious. January 25, 2009. Michael Jackson was in his home in Los Angeles preparing for rehearsals, still struggling to sleep. That morning, Conrad Murray administered propofol, but something went wrong. Michael stopped breathing, and instead of immediately calling 911, Murray spent time attempting to revive them. And without proper equipment or monitoring, by the time paramedic was called, it was too late. Michael Jackson, pronounced dead at 50 years old. Official cause of the death, acute propofol intoxication. The coroner ruled it was a homicide, not an accident, not a natural cause, a homicide. Murray was later charged and convicted of involuntary manslaughter. But years after the death, Michael Jackson's name started showing up again. Not because of his music, but because something else entirely. The Epstein Files. When documents connected to Jeffrey Epstein began to surface, names of powerful, famous, and influential people started getting pulled into conversation. And among those names, there was Michael Jackson. Now this is where things get important, because seeing a name in those documents does not automatically mean wrongdoing. And in Michael Jackson case, there has never been any official charge or confirmed evidence linked him into some kind of crime or related into Epstein himself. But that didn't stop the internet from digging around, because once the name appears in something like that, people start connecting dots even when those dots don't necessarily connect. But the real question isn't just why he was there. There are much bigger questions that still haven't been answered, like what was actually going behind the scene back then. Because when you start looking at that part, it gets strange. Michael Jackson wasn't just a musician, he was the biggest star of all time. So if you want a part 2 where we really break down the strange side of his story, tell me in the comments. Alright, if you made this part, you're actually insane, but clearly you liked the video. So yeah, just like and subscribe right now. Go now, come on. Yeah, that's it, done. And yeah, thank you for watching. This is it. See you next one. Yeah, I'm out.